My name is Arthur. I'm 38 years old, a fixer of things. Washing machines, dryers, refrigerators, and the occasional antique radio. They all find their way to my capable hands. I reside in this humble dwelling on a tranquil street, where ancient trees stand guard, older than most of the neighborhood's inhabitants. It's the house where I spent my childhood, a place steeped in familiarity. My life possesses a certain rhythm, a comforting predictability I've come to cherish. Days unfold with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and, in winter, the gentle hum of the furnace. They conclude with the faint scent of solder and grease on my hands, a satisfying ache in my back. My garage workshop is a sanctuary, filled with intricate schematics, a treasure trove of spare parts, and the silent companionship of machines patiently awaiting my understanding. Some might deem it a solitary existence, but I've never perceived it that way. There's a profound peace in the logic of a broken circuit, a clarity rarely found in human interactions. My routine was a fortress, meticulously constructed from simple, repeatable actions. Wake, brew coffee, drive the van to a job, listen to the subtle rattle of tools in the back, return home, tinker in the garage, eat dinner standing at the sink, immerse myself in a book, sleep, a perfectly closed loop. It was enough, or so I had meticulously convinced myself. Years ago, my father, ever the unfinished project enthusiast, converted the upstairs of my house into a small apartment. He never quite completed it, yet rented it out nonetheless. For the past 2 years, it had remained vacant. I relished the silence. It solidified the feeling that the house was truly mine, every creak and groan a familiar whisper. However, property taxes had climbed, and the quiet began to feel less like peace and more like an echoing void. So, I placed an advertisement online. A week later, a young man named Finn moved in. A local college student, he was a bundle of nervous energy, his boxes overflowing with textbooks and video games. He seemed like a decent kid, quiet, keeping to himself. That suited me perfectly. I assisted him in maneuvering a heavy dresser up the narrow staircase, and in return, he promised to keep his music at a reasonable volume. A simple, agreeable transaction. It was 2 days after his arrival that I encountered her. I was in the garage, diligently cleaning the carburetor of a lawnmower, my hands smudged black with grime. The side door creaked open, revealing Finn, a sheepish expression on his face. Finn, voiceover, "Hey, Arthur, sorry to intrude. The fridge upstairs, it's not getting cold." Narrator. I wiped my hands on a rag, the grease merely smearing into a new, abstract pattern. "I can take a look." I followed him up the external staircase that led to his apartment. The door was ajar. Inside, a woman knelt, intently scrubbing a stubborn mark from the hardwood floor. Her back was to me, her hair secured in a loose, messy bun, and she wore a simple gray sweatshirt. "Finn, voiceover, my sister, Lena," Finn announced our presence. Narrator. She glanced over her shoulder, pausing mid-motion, caught between kneeling and standing. She was undeniably beautiful, but it was a weary kind of beauty. Faint, charcoal-like smudges of shadow rested beneath her eyes, and her smile, though polite and functional, didn't quite reach them. "Lena, voiceover, hello," she said, her voice unexpectedly low and soft. Narrator. "Arthur," I replied, nodding. "Finn tells me the fridge is on the blink." She finally rose, wiping her hands on her jeans. "Lena, voiceover, it is. We put some groceries in last night, and everything's lukewarm. I apologize for disrupting your work." Narrator. "It is my work," I responded, and a slight twitch at the corner of her mouth deepened her smile, making it a touch more genuine. I slid the refrigerator away from the wall. The familiar death rattle of the compressor kicking on, then immediately off, told me everything I needed to know before I even opened the back panel. A faulty relay, an easy fix. They stood in the small kitchen, watching me. Finn was absorbed in his phone, already mentally detached. But Lena watched my hands, silent, observing as I clipped wires, extracted the defective part, and fumbled in my pocket for the spare I almost invariably carried. There was an unspoken intensity in her gaze, an appreciation for the simple, tangible act of repair. After a few minutes, the compressor hummed to life, a steady, healthy sound this time. I slid the unit back into place. Narrator. "Should be good now. Give it an hour or 2 to reach temperature." Lena. Voiceover. "Thank you," Lena said. She opened one of the still warm cans of soda on the counter. Can I offer you something? Water? A tragically room temperature cola? Narrator. I almost declined. It was my ingrained habit to complete a job and depart, retreating back into my own designated space. But something in her expression, a flicker of hopeful invitation, made me pause. Narrator. Water would be great. Thanks. She handed me a bottle from a case on the floor. Our fingers brushed for a fleeting fraction of a second. It was insignificant, a meaningless accidental contact, yet it felt like a current, a small jolt of electricity that pierced through the insulation I'd meticulously wrapped around myself for years. Her eyes met mine for just a moment, and I saw it again, that profound, bone-deep weariness. It was a look I recognized, for I had witnessed it in my own reflection on my lonelier nights. Then it vanished, swiftly shuttered behind another polite smile. Narrator. Well, I said, taking a step back towards the door. Let me know if you encounter any other issues. Lena, voiceover, we will, she replied, and it sounded like a promise. Narrator. I returned to my garage, but the familiar sense of grease and oil suddenly seemed stale. The quiet felt heavier. I thought about the way she had watched my hands, as if the simple act of mending something held a magic she hadn't witnessed in a long time. I wondered what in her life was broken that couldn't be fixed with a new relay and a pair of pliers. It was a question I had no right to ponder, but it lingered in the air long after I'd finished with the lawnmower and scrubbed the grease from my hands. A week later, a text arrived from Finn. Dishwasher's making a weird grinding noise. I went upstairs. Lena was there again, seated at the small kitchen table with a laptop, though it was closed. She explained Finn was at the library. She brewed a pot of coffee and offered me a cup. I accepted. The grinding noise, it turned out, was merely a stray fork that had tumbled into the bottom of the machine, another effortless fix. We conversed as I worked, small talk about the weather, the town. She inquired about my house, if I'd always lived there. Narrator. Most of my life, I told her, tightening a hose clamp. My dad was the one who built this apartment. Lena, voiceover, he was always starting projects and finishing them? She asked, a gentle tease in her voice. Narrator. I smiled. Not always. That part he usually entrusted to me. Narrator. She was easy to talk to. Or rather, she was easy to be quiet with. The silences weren't awkward. They were comfortable, filled only with the faint clink of my tools and the slow tick of the clock on her wall. She revealed she was an editor, working from home. She didn't mention a husband, and I didn't ask. This became our new routine. Every week or two, something else would inexplicably malfunction. The thermostat would jam. A faucet would develop a persistent drip. The screen door hinge would come loose. Finn was never present. It was always just Lena, waiting with a freshly brewed cup of coffee and a quiet presence that was swiftly becoming the anchor of my week. I knew, on some level, that a house this small couldn't possibly harbor so many technical ailments. I knew the faucet probably wasn't that leaky, the thermostat likely fine, but I continued to ascend because she continued to ask. Our conversations gradually deepened, transitioning from the superficial to the personal. She spoke in carefully edited sentences, revealing fragments of her life, as if testing the waters. She spoke of a life in the city that, on the surface, appeared brilliant but felt hollow beneath. She mentioned a husband, Robert, only once or twice. His name was invariably attached to a business trip or a late night at the office. He was an abstraction, a ghostly figure in her narrative. Lena, voiceover, he dislikes small towns, she remarked one afternoon, watching me recock the seal around her bathtub. He claims there's nothing to do here. Narrator. There's plenty to do, I countered. It's just quieter. Lena, voiceover, I appreciate the quiet, she said, and the way she uttered it made me suspect she hadn't experienced much of it in her life. Narrator. I found myself eagerly anticipating Finn's texts, the fabricated emergencies that beckoned me upstairs. Her apartment transformed into a sanctuary from my own structured silence. It was a different kind of quiet, a shared quiet. I was becoming a connoisseur of her moods. I could discern by the way she gripped her coffee mug whether it was a good day or a bad one. I could perceive the tension in her shoulders when she attempted to conceal her sadness. And I could witness it gradually melt away as we sat together, not conversing, simply listening to the house settle around us. I was repairing her appliances, but it felt as though she was mending me. Each visit chipped away at the rust that had accumulated around my own heart. I was beginning to experience emotions I hadn't felt in a very long time, a gentle, persistent hope, a longing for the sound of her key turning in the upstairs door. It was simultaneously terrifying and utterly wonderful. I was no longer merely the man who lived downstairs. I was Arthur, and I was patiently awaiting the next thing to break. One Thursday evening, it happened. The text arrived late, around 9 o'clock. It was from Finn, as usual. "Hey Arthur, garbage disposal is making a weird noise. Lena's here. Can you come up?" I knew it was a fabrication. The disposal was brand new. I'd installed it myself 2 months prior. Yet, I slipped on my shoes and went anyway. The air was cool, carrying the first genuine hint of autumn. I ascended the wooden stairs, my footsteps echoing in the evening stillness. The door was unlocked. I pushed it open gently. The apartment was dark, save for a small lamp on the kitchen counter, which cast a soft, golden glow over the room. Finn was nowhere in sight. Lena sat at the table, her back to me, her shoulders trembling slightly. I stood in the doorway for a moment, my hand resting on the frame. My initial instinct was to retreat, to grant her privacy, but my feet remained rooted. Narrator. "Lena," I said, my voice barely a whisper. Narrator. She didn't turn around. Lena, voiceover, "The disposal is fine," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm sorry. I couldn't conceive of another excuse." Narrator. I stepped inside and closed the door softly behind me. I walked over to the kitchen table and sat down in the chair opposite her. She finally looked up. Her face was streaked with tears, her eyes red and swollen. The meticulous composure she always maintained was utterly gone, replaced by a raw, unfiltered vulnerability that stole my breath. Narrator. "It's okay," I said. It was the only thing I could think of to say. She let out a shaky breath that was half laugh, half sob. Lena, voiceover, "Is it? Nothing feels okay." She stared down at her hands, which were clenched into tight fists on the tabletop. "Robert believes I'm at my book club. We haven't had a book club for 2 years, it disbanded." She looked at me, her eyes pleading for something, not a solution, not advice, simply understanding. "He didn't ask what book we were reading," she continued, her voice trembling. "He hasn't asked me a genuine question in years. We just orbit each other. 2 planets in a cold, dead solar system. Sometimes I feel like I'm screaming, but I'm making no sound." The silence in the room was immense, holding her confession, her pain, her exhaustion. I didn't attempt to fill it. I didn't tell her what to do. I didn't assure her it would all work out. I simply sat there with her, a silent witness to the truth she had finally dared to speak aloud. I reached across the table and gently touched her clenched fist with my fingertips. It wasn't a romantic gesture, it was an anchor, a simple physical declaration. "I am here. You are not alone in this moment." She slowly unfurled her fingers and turned her hand over, palm facing upward. I rested my hand over hers. We sat like that for a long time, in the quiet glow of the single lamp, while the house breathed around us. Her tears subsided. The tension in her shoulders eased. "Lena, voiceover, thank you, Arthur," she whispered finally. Narrator. "You don't have to thank me," I said. In that moment, something shifted between us. The carefully constructed wall of pretense, the broken appliances, the casual coffee, all crumbled into dust. We were simply 2 people sitting in a dimly lit kitchen, sharing a silence that was more honest than any conversation I'd ever had. I knew then that I would do anything to protect that quiet space for her, to be the person she could be silent with. I had fallen in love not with the beautiful, composed woman who offered me coffee, but with the heartbroken stranger who sat across from me, her hand resting in mine. And I knew my quiet, predictable life was over. A new one, uncertain and terrifying and full of hope, was just beginning. The next 2 weeks passed in quiet. There were no more fabricated emergencies. We had crossed a line, and we both seemed to know it. We didn't discuss that night, we didn't have to. The understanding hung between us, a shared secret. I'd glimpse her coming or going, and we'd exchange a small, knowing smile. The sadness still lingered in her eyes, but now there was something else too. A flicker of strength, a resolve that hadn't been present before. Then, on a Saturday afternoon, everything changed. I was in my garage, the wide door open to the crisp autumn air. I was meticulously cleaning the contacts on a vintage amplifier, a delicate task that demanded my utmost focus. The sharp scent of contact cleaner hung in the air. That's when a car pulled into my driveway. It was a sleek black sedan, so impeccably polished it reflected the clouds in the sky. It seemed utterly out of place on our humble street, an alien vessel from another realm. A man emerged from the driver's side. Tall, dressed in a sharply tailored dark suit, his shoes likely cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. He exuded an air of casual, confident ownership, as if the entire world were his executive lounge. He didn't glance at me. His gaze swept past, fixed on the house, his expression a mixture of impatience and disdain. It had to be Robert. He strode towards the upstairs apartment, his expensive shoes crunching on the gravel. He didn't knock. He simply called out, his voice sharp and cutting, devoid of any warmth. Robert, voiceover, Lena, are you ready? We're going to be late. Narrator. The words weren't a question, they were a command. I remained perfectly still, a small screwdriver clutched in my hand. A cold, protective anger coiled in my gut. I yearned to stand, to tell him to lower his voice, to show some respect. But I knew it wasn't my place. This wasn't my fight. My role was to be the quiet harbor, not the warship. Any move I made would only exacerbate things for her. The upstairs door opened, and Lena appeared on the landing. From the garage, I witnessed the instantaneous transformation. The flicker of strength I'd seen in her over the past 2 weeks vanished, extinguished like a candle flame in a sudden gust of wind. Her shoulders slumped. Her face became a neutral mask. She wore a dress I'd never seen before, elegant and formal. She looked like a stranger, a woman playing a part. Lena, voiceover, I'll be right down, Robert, she said, her voice flat and obedient. Narrator. He glanced down at his watch, a thin silver object on his wrist. Robert, voiceover, 5 minutes. Narrator. He didn't wait for a reply. He turned and walked back to his car, pulling out his phone and immediately becoming absorbed in it. He exuded an aura of profound indifference. Lena's eyes found mine across the yard. For a single, heartbreaking second, her mask slipped. I saw the panic, the despair, the silent plea. I simply held her gaze. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I just looked at her, attempting to pour all the strength and patience I possessed into that one look. I tried to convey, without words, that I was still here, that this man and his polished car changed nothing, that the quiet space we'd built was still waiting for her. She gave me the smallest, almost imperceptible nod. Then she turned and disappeared back into the apartment. I returned to my amplifier, but my hands were shaking. The delicate work was impossible now. The silence of my garage no longer felt like peace. It felt like the tense, heavy quiet before a storm. I had passed the test. I had stayed in my place, but I had never felt more helpless in my entire life. The storm broke a week later. It was late, well after midnight. I was in bed, reading, when I heard it. A muffled shout from upstairs. Then another, sharper this time. A man's voice, angry and dismissive. Robert's voice. I couldn't discern the words, only the cold, hard tone. Then a door slammed with such force that a picture frame on my own wall rattled. The sound of a car engine roaring to life, tires squealing as it pulled out of the driveway and sped down the street. Then an unnerving silence. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. I considered going up, checking on her, but I forced myself to wait. This was her moment, her decision. My presence would only complicate it. I had to trust her. I had to trust the strength I'd seen flickering within her. 20 minutes passed. The silence stretched thin and fragile. I rose from bed and went to the kitchen for a glass of water, my ears straining for any sound from above. Nothing. Just the hum of my own refrigerator. Then I heard it, not a knock on the upstairs door, but on my own, a soft, hesitant tapping on the back door that led out to the yard. I opened it. Lena stood there, silhouetted by the dim light of the porch lamp. She held a single, worn-looking suitcase. Her face was pale, but her eyes were clear. The tears were gone. The panic was gone. In their place was a quiet, unshakable resolve. She had made her choice. She didn't ask to come in. She didn't ask to stay. She simply looked at me, her gaze steady. Lena, voiceover, can you drive me to the bus station? She asked, her voice low but firm. Narrator. I didn't inquire about what had happened. I didn't ask where she was going or when she was returning. She didn't need an interrogation. She needed a ride. Narrator. Of course, I said. Let me get my keys. I helped her with the suitcase, placing it carefully in the back of my van, amidst the toolboxes and spare parts. She got into the passenger seat without a word. The drive to the bus station was silent. The streets of our small town were deserted, bathed in the lonely orange glow of the streetlights. I didn't turn on the radio. The silence felt necessary, respectful. The station was a sterile, brightly lit box that smelled of disinfectant and faint desperation. Only a few other people were there, scattered on the hard plastic chairs, lost in their own worlds. I checked the departure board. A bus heading north was leaving in 45 minutes. Lena, voiceover, I have a friend in a city called Riverbend, she said, as if sensing my unspoken question. I can stay with her for a while. Narrator. Okay, I said. I bought her a coffee from a vending machine. It was terrible, but she cradled it in her hands as if it were a precious source of warmth. We sat on the uncomfortable chairs, her suitcase resting at her feet. It felt like the end of something. It felt like the beginning of something. It was both. When they finally called her bus, we stood up. There was a moment of awkward hesitation. What do you say in a moment like this? There were no words for the gratitude, the fear, the hope that hung in the air between us. Lena, voiceover, thank you, Arthur, she said, her eyes locking onto mine. For everything. For the leaky faucets, for the coffee, for just being quiet with me. Narrator. Be safe, Lena, I said. It felt inadequate, but it was all I had. She reached out and squeezed my arm, a brief, firm gesture of farewell. Then she turned, picked up her suitcase, and walked towards the bus without looking back. I watched until the automatic doors hissed shut behind her. I stood there for a long time, staring at the empty space where she had been, the faint warmth of her touch still lingering on my arm. Then I walked back to my van, the sole occupant of my quiet, empty house. Time began to pass in a slow, steady rhythm, like the drip of a faucet I couldn't fix. The first few weeks were the hardest. The silence in the house was different now. It wasn't the comfortable solitude I had known before. It was an absence. Every creak from the empty apartment upstairs was a phantom footstep, a memory of a presence that was no longer there. Finn moved out a month after Lena left. He did it quietly, enlisting a couple of his college friends. He left the key on the kitchen counter with a short, scribbled note. Thanks for everything. Tell Lena I'm sorry. The apartment was officially empty again. I went up and walked through the vacant rooms, the air stale and still. The faint scent of her coffee was gone. It was just a space again. I fell back into my old routine, but it felt hollow. The work was still satisfying. The logic of the machine still a comfort. But the closed loop of my life now felt like a cage. I had tasted something else, a connection that went beyond wires and circuits, and the memory of it lingered. Lena and I kept in touch, but it was sporadic, careful. A text from her once a week or so. A picture of a foggy morning over the Willow Creek, found a decent coffee shop. Another of a book she was reading, this one made me cry. They were small signals, little proofs of life sent across the miles. She was building something new for herself, and I knew she needed the space to do it without the weight of whatever we were or whatever we might become. My replies were just as simple. A picture of the 1950s toaster I'd restored, its chrome gleaming. It makes perfect toast. A shot of the first snowfall blanketing my yard. The world is quiet today. We were maintaining a connection, a thin, delicate thread stretched across hundreds of miles, careful not to put too much weight on it, lest it snap. Months passed. Autumn gave way to the deep freeze of winter, which then slowly melted into the muddy promise of spring. The upstairs apartment remained empty. I had a few inquiries, but I always found a reason not to rent it out. The timing wasn't right. The applicant seemed too loud. The truth was, I was keeping it for her. A silent, hopeful gesture she knew nothing about. One Tuesday in late April, I was at the local diner. It's the kind of place that hasn't changed in 50 years, with red vinyl booths and a countertop worn smooth by decades of elbows and coffee cups. It was my place. I was sitting in my usual booth, nursing a cup of coffee and reading the newspaper. The bell over the door jingled. I glanced up, a reflexive habit, and my heart stopped. It was her. She stood in the doorway, blinking in the sudden brightness of the diner. Her hair was a little shorter, and she wore a simple blue dress I'd never seen before. But the true change was in her eyes. The deep, weary sadness was gone completely. The haunted look had been replaced by a calm, settled peace. She looked serene. She looked like she was finally home in her own skin. Our eyes met across the room. A slow, brilliant smile spread across her face, a real smile that illuminated everything around her. She walked towards my booth. Lena, voiceover, is this seat taken? She asked. Narrator. I felt like I couldn't breathe. Narrator. It's been waiting for you, I managed to say. She slid into the vinyl seat across from me. The waitress approached, and Lena ordered a black coffee. We simply looked at each other for a moment, the bustling sounds of the diner fading into a low hum. Narrator. You're back, I said, stating the obvious. Lena, voiceover, I'm back, she confirmed. I found a small place over on Elm Street. The divorce is final. It's all quiet now. Narrator. We didn't discuss Robert. We didn't discuss the night she left. There was no need to rehash the past, it was a closed chapter. We spoke of her time in Riverbend, the job she'd found with a small publishing house there, which she was now performing remotely. We discussed my work, the antique radio I was still tinkering with. The conversation was easy, effortless. It felt like picking up a conversation from yesterday, not one left hanging for half a year. She looked at me over the rim of her coffee cup, her expression open and clear. Lena, voiceover, the upstairs apartment, she said. Is it still empty? Narrator. I took a slow sip of my own coffee, the warmth spreading through my chest. I thought about my quiet, predictable life, the fortress of routine I had built around myself. It seemed like a lifetime ago. That man was a stranger to me now. This man, the one sitting in a diner booth across from the woman who had dismantled his world and then rebuilt it into something better, was someone new. He was anchored. He was hopeful. Narrator. Yes, I said, a smile finding its way to my lips. It is. We sat there in the afternoon, light slanting through the diner window, and I knew that this was not an ending. It was a beginning, a quiet one, a hopeful one. And for the first time in a very long time, I was not afraid of what came next. The waitress returned, placing the check on the table. Lena reached for it, but I covered her hand with mine. Narrator. My treat, I insisted. Welcome home. Her smile deepened, and this time, it reached her eyes, a radiant warmth that chased away the last vestiges of weariness. Lena, voiceover, thank you, Arthur. Narrator. We lingered a little longer, the silence between us no longer an absence but a comfortable fullness. It was a silence filled with unspoken promises, with the quiet understanding of two souls who had found their way back to each other, not through grand gestures, but through shared vulnerabilities and the steady hum of a mended life. As we finally stepped out of the diner and into the gentle afternoon sun, Lena turned to me. Lena, voiceover, I was thinking, she began, a playful glint in her eyes, that upstairs apartment could use a good handyman. And maybe, a bit of a creative overhaul. Narrator. I laughed, a genuine, joyful sound that felt entirely new. Narrator. I might know a guy, I replied, and the unspoken invitation hung in the air, a beautiful, limitless possibility. And I'd be happy to help you make it truly yours. We walked down the street, the spring air crisp and promising, a new rhythm to our steps. The quiet of my predictable life had been broken, not by chaos, but by connection. And I wouldn't have it any other way. This was not a quick fix, this was a lifelong project, and I was ready to begin.